Hey there, everyone. Today, I recently did a podcast with Brian Duff over at Mind4Survival about essential prepping gear, and it was a really good podcast. So I wanted to play a segment of that podcast here today, the video segment. Really good podcast. This is a summation basically of the things we talked about in that podcast. But we went on for about 2 hours breaking down all of these different things a little bit deeper. So very good podcast. Like I said, this is only about 15 minutes of that show. So make sure and head over to Mind4Survival. I'll put the link below and you can listen to that podcast whenever you get a chance. Very good show. Most of you probably know Brian Duff and I do the Survival Preppers YouTube channel. And over there, we talk about a whole bunch of stuff, politics, conspiracies, prepping, all sorts of stuff. But this one is on Brian's Mind4Survival podcast, which is strictly preparedness stuff. But at any rate, I want to go ahead and start playing this video. Like I said, if you get a chance, make sure and listen to that podcast episode. It's a little bit long, but it's full of fantastic information. So let's go ahead and get into the video. This one will be a little bit different one. This is a little bit like old school prepper conversation.
Yeah, we haven't done that in a while. We do the, if people are listening to the podcast, you might have heard me talk about, I don't know, maybe you haven't. It's Dale and I do the Survival Preppers YouTube channel. Definitely not filtered. So if you're used to the podcast over here, or, you're used to some of our tamer stuff on the bug out location, if you go over to the Survival Preppers, I do use filler, I think the guy that said something about one of the comments was use filler F-bombs or something like that. I do use filler F-bombs and all that over there. And we talk about a lot of politics and conspiracies and all that. So if you go over there, just beware.
Yeah, I was just listening to your podcast on PTSD today, which is a fantastic podcast too. But as I was listening to it, I was going, wow, this is old Brian. This is the Brian like that I first met.
Yeah, well, I think, a lot of us has changed that, that's happened over the years where, you had a huge podcast that's been going for years and you kind of backed off it a bit.
Yeah.
Right? Cause and moved on to talking about a lot more. Cause let's face it, as preppers out there, right? We're in the, I think we're in the varsity league, or we're in the big leagues now in some level, or maybe the big leagues is like some SHTF event that we're going to talk about SHTF essential gear here in a second. But maybe we're in high school, junior college level of preparing for craziness and actually living through craziness happening. All the stuff that we used to be kind of conspiracy theories, we kind of seem on one end of the angle to go through or not right now.
Yeah, trial by fire. It also makes this type of stuff that we're going to be talking about today a lot more fun too, because it's not just repetitive and all that stuff. So, and it's really important information to have too, especially if you're just first starting out. So, always good to get, even for us, like we're in junior college or whatever, it's good to get back to the basics and rethink this stuff sometimes.
Well, and it's also fun, man. We can have fun once in a while talking about SHTF gear and, what's essential. And then I think that's where you get a lot of the prepper debates, right? That happen, or, what caliber do you need of this, or which bug out bag, or how many bug out bags should you have, and all that. It's kind of where we all sort of ride each other.
Yeah, but it all starts with the basics, and once you've got those basics down, that's where you kind of branch off and individualize and do all that stuff, and then you do have those conversations with people, and some most of the time they're good, constructive conversations. Really depends on who you talk to, but yeah, it all starts with the basics, and then you take it where you need to, as far as what your preparedness plan is and all of that stuff.
That's like when people split off and going down like the little becoming an EMT route or getting some medicine or becoming like a ham radio operator. I can't do the ham thing, man. I really want to learn, but somehow I get a panic attack just thinking about ham radio stuff.
Yeah, it definitely, it's something you really have to be interested in. But again, that goes back to the basic stuff. There's some basic stuff that will make it super useful in some sort of SHTF event. But then there's that big, long rabbit hole of just so many things you can do with ham radio if you're that interested in it. I just never was. So I went through the whole process of getting my test and putting an antenna up and learning how to use it and all that stuff. And then after that, it was just kind of like, okay, this is not for me. But
so you got your basic ham license, right?
Yeah, and it's expired by now. I don't want to renew it again because it's the FCC knowing my address and all that stuff, and that prepper stuff. But I just never used it, so it's kind of pointless to go. And you don't have to get your license to learn how to use ham radio, but yeah, I went down that
You
whole.
just have to get your license to use it, right? To operate it.
Yeah, if you're going to broadcast, you need a license these days. In an SHTF event, not so much, but these days you do. But honestly, to learn how to use it, you don't need to. You don't need to broadcast, really. You can just listen and figure out the frequencies and all the technical stuff, and then you know all that stuff when some sort of disaster happens, and the FCC isn't going to care if you've got your license or not, if it's a natural disaster, large scale, whatever.
Yeah, or have the ability to do anything about it. What about and we'll get to communications down the road here, but what are your thoughts real quick on because we talked about it over on the Survival Preppers Air Day is CB radio. I keep looking back, as a kid, that was like the technology you had to talk to people, kind of like that was like early cell phone technology, right? And so I remember because we would go on family trips, so we had a CB in the car, and you'd hear everybody talking on it. I think that might be a pretty good way to legally communicate, right?
Yeah, and I've never really used them, so I don't really know. On one of my older podcasts, I talked a little bit of smack about them and got a lot of heat from CB guy. So I know they're more limited than ham radio, but it's essentially the same type of thing. It's just a matter of who's on CB radio these days, or who's going to be on ham radio. So if you've got one person that's going to have a CB and you're going to be able to communicate with them, it's not going to be that useful. Whereas if ham, there's a handful of people, it's going to be a little bit better. But as far as like your if you've got a few cars and you're on a bug out route, or you've got friends in the neighborhood that all have CB, that would be a great way to communicate. But it's just what your needs are.
I was thinking more locally, right? Like, if you have a big piece of property or there's several of you on different pieces. I had a buddy that I worked over, Roger. He was he's from South Africa. He was a South African Special Forces guy. And so in South Africa, right, we've seen all the difficulty that they've had there with lawlessness and everything that's going on. Well, he was on a farm out in the country, and there was no police response coming to them. And they would do these terrible home invasions out there where they just set up camp in your house and do whatever. And sometimes they let you live, sometimes they kill the family, whatever. So they're their own response force. So out there, they had basically a citizens band radio where they were all wired up together. And if something happened, someone saw something happen and people walk around, they were their own defense force, and they'd put out the call on the ham radio, and they'd all come out and do whatever they have to do to defend themselves. So I think in an SHTF event, that'd be a great option. But so let's start with what do you consider an SHTF kit? What do you consider SHTF gear?
Well, I guess we'll start off with what I don't think it is. I mean, I don't think we're going to be talking about it like it's a big plastic bin with all of this stuff in it, or your bug out bag with all this stuff in it. I think the kit itself is more of kit as the stuff you're going to need, whether that's mentally, whether that's physical, whether that's tools, all of that stuff. So it's not necessarily a, quote unquote kit that you put together and you store it somewhere in your garage. But it's all that, I think, that basic stuff that is that kind of essential stuff that you really don't think twice. It's just, regardless what happens, this is what I'm going to need. This is the basic stuff that, regardless what sort of disaster it is, whether it's natural disaster, something small scale, that stuff that is that bare minimum stuff that'll get you by. And then, like we were just talking about, you go from that point of that basic stuff, and you kind of spread out and you kind of individualize what you want and what you're going to need. And everybody's is going to be different. But that's kind of what I think when you think of the basic SHTF kit, is just that main stuff, that kind of that stuff that every prepper needs, that foundation, and then you build from there. Is that kind of your
stuff? Yeah, I kind of think it's the stuff that gets you by. If you look at, I call it the survival pyramid. It's basically the rule of threes turned into a pyramid. And I look at it as it's the basic stuff that gets you by. So you have your 3 hours of shelter considered. Like, you should literally, I know people always go for food and water. And if it's hot out or whatever, you're exerting yourself, you can, need water really quick. But the biggest one that we talk about, and that really kills you first, is lack of shelter, right? If you survive an immediate survival issue where somebody tries to kill you, get in an altercation, you survive that, and you survive any sort of massive trauma, like, a beam falls out of the sky and lands on you. Like you can't, if you weren't aware of seeing it coming, you're done. Once you get past all that, though, I think it comes down to really the way people should look at it is, what's the next thing that's going to kill you, right? Well, so you need your personal defensive weapons because our biggest threats typically from people, or if you're in Alaska, a grizzly bear. So you need your personal defense weapons. Well, if you're putting bullets some way and you're worried about somebody putting bullets or knives or a bear or whatever happens coming the other way, you need a first aid kit, because that gets you from that immediate death. That gets you through like the next, you can bleed to death in a couple of minutes. If you don't have a tourniquet, you'll die within 6 to 10 minutes typically if you don't have oxygen going to your brain. So you need the ability to stop bleeding. You need the ability to help keep someone's circulation going, help keep oxygen going to the brain. After about 5 minutes, if sometimes even less, a person starts suffering irreversible brain damage. So you have to address that. Then I think you move into your shelter, right? And shelter clothing should be considered shelter on some level. I mean, it's not greatest. You'd rather be in a hot tent somewhere than, just laying on the ground in your clothes. But hey, I mean, people do it, right? And military people, all kinds of people, they got those minimalist campers, hike through campers. They just lay down on the ground and go to sleep. So your clothes are literally your shelter at that point. So I think then you need to take care of shelter, food, or water, then food, and work your way on up. So
yeah, anything that protects you from the elements, I think of as shelter. So yeah, clothes are absolutely shelter. If you don't have anything else and you're stacking branches together and throwing leaves on top and making a lean-to shelter, you're going to want extra coats and putting on all the, if you got an extra pair of pants in your bug out bag, you're throwing those on. I mean, so yeah, it's definitely shelter. Shelter is one of those too, which is a pretty easy one for the most part. If you're at home and something happens, you've got shelter. If you're in your car, something happens, you got shelter. But it's also one of those that you have to understand, if none of those are available, what your options are, and learning how to do some of that stuff. Like I mentioned, the lean-to shelter and all that. You may never have to use it, but if you find yourself in a situation where you do, and you're just kind of trying to draw off the top of your head of a couple YouTube videos you saw how to make a lean-to shelter, I mean, you just never know, and that's what preparedness is all about. But yeah, that was a good list of topics too. Everything right there.
You also mentioned something, man, and you mentioned about being in your home, you have shelter. When you're in your car, you have shelter. And that's kind of how you can look at your EDC stuff too, right? There's really three, for most of us, there's really three sort of EDC profiles that we have, right? Everyday carry profiles that we have. You have what is physically on you. So if you walk out your front door, what are you wearing? What do you have on you to make sure that you survive the survival pyramid, right? That you get past the survival, and that you get into, if you can get past surviving, actually in a weird way, worrying about where your water is going to come from is a good thing. Because that meant you just survived. You ended any life ending, like any death related incidents right then. Now you're focused on the water. So, but I think on EDC, if you look at EDC, you kind of look at the same way. You have what's on you, you have what's in your house, and you have what's in your car. Those are the three states that you have. I mean, if you go into somebody else's car, you have what's in their car. So, I mean, whether they prepare or not. So then you may be better stocked with what you have on you. So I think when it comes to EDC, you can kind of think of it in somewhat like that level.
Yeah, it could be a downfall too, because you've got all your EDC stuff in your car. And if something happens while you're in somebody else's car, you're like, damn it, this guy doesn't have anything. He's got a screwdriver and a pair of jumper cables.
Well, and you can be that guy, right? I mean, I imagine you don't do it. I don't do it. And it's probably because we don't want to look like that guy, but you can be like, hey man, we're going on a drive in your car. Hang on, and go grab your bug out bag and throw it in their trunk and go, yeah, they're going to make fun of you, but you do have that option. Yeah.
Well, and it just depends on how you broach that subject too. It's kind of like, hey man, I just carry this. This has got some important stuff in it. So I'm going to grab this before we get going. You don't have to explain to them what it is or any of that stuff. Just, hey, I don't want somebody to steal this or, whatever. Just make up an excuse. You don't have to necessarily say, I got to go grab my bug out bag because you don't have jack squat in your car.
Well, and that's a concern nowadays too, right? We know the crime rate's going up. So, and you can look in the newspapers, you can see the number of smash and grabs happening in stores and cars. I just watched a Vice episode. I think it was a pretty recent episode where they were talking. They were in, I think, Chicago or some city in Indianapolis maybe, and they were talking about the just the crazy amount of carjackings that are going on. Right. Well, again, now you get back to your thing, right? If you have what's in your car, but if you get carjacked, all you have is what's on you.
Yeah.
Right. And so you got to, I think, take that into account. Like maybe sometimes you don't want your bug out bag with you when you're driving around town. If you're going to an area or crime's up in your area, or at a minimum, don't leave it in your car. I mean, it's easier to leave a heavy ass bug out bag in your car than take it into the house. But and sometimes, I know I leave mine.
I do
probably at times when I shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things. There's if the longer you do this, inevitably the more money you're going to be putting into the stuff in your bug out bag. So you can get to the point where you've got hundreds of dollars worth of stuff in that bag. So if somebody steals that, it's not just like, my backpack got stolen. You're talking about all your stuff. Maybe you got some expensive fixed blade knife. You've got your water filter. All that different stuff in there. If somebody takes off with that, criminal probably going to look at that going, what do I need this crap for? But it's like, damn it, now I got to start over. So
yeah, well, and especially you tend to put your good stuff in your bug out bag, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't put the Chinese junk in the bug out bag, and I'm really trying hard now to no longer buy Chinese junk. I have a bunch of M4S stuff that Mind4Survival swag, and I'm purposely not selling it because it's all Chinese junk. It's all Chinese and made in China. Some good patches and stuff, but I think I'm going to try to do everything made in America. And I'm trying to buy everything made in America, at least like maybe Germany, like if it's a knife or something, kind of like that.
Yeah, but easier said than done these days.